Hello and welcome to our webinar, Tips for Reading with Your Children at Home. My name is Nicole Imgrund and I am the owner and director at River's Edge Counseling Center here in St. Albert. And we offer counseling services to adults and teens, couples, and families in person when we can. And also we offer video and phone counseling as well. This webinar is part of a series of webinars, Wellness Matters during COVID. We have about another 10 of them coming up. You're welcome to look at what they are on the website. Some of them in particular might be of interest to parents and families. Christine Crocker in the next few weeks has two webinars, one to schedule or not to schedule. I see that question being asked all over social media right now, and she'll tackle that and other hard questions while you have your kids at home. And creating a family manifesto is her second one. Also, some recorded webinars, if you missed them, are now posted to the website. Positive Pandemic Parenting by Andrea Thrall, and How to Talk to Your Kids About the Big Stuff with Lindsay McCall. And obviously a number of webinars also that might help you as moms and dads with your own self-care during what can be a really challenging time for a lot of us. Our speaker today is Dr. Rhonda Wizniak. Rhonda is part of the team at River's Edge Counseling Center. She is our assessment specialist and offers a full range of assessments for children and teens. Dr. Wizniak, Rhonda, has been providing assessments and consultation services to children, adolescents, and adults since 2007. She has a doctoral degree from the University of Alberta, focusing in educational psychology. Rhonda also received a bachelor's degree with distinction in education from the University of Alberta with a focus on early childhood education. Rhonda has been providing psychological services in school settings for quite a long time and continues to. And the reading process has always been an area of special interest to her, particularly as it pertains to struggling readers. Rhonda's also a mom with a couple of kids at home, so she certainly knows what it's like for all of us too. With that, I am going to turn it over to you, Rhonda.
Okay, thank you. I'll just share the screen here so I can get my presentation up. All right, so yes, I do have quite a few education degrees and know a lot about the reading process. And then being put in a position where I am basically teaching my children to read at home has been quite a different experience. So I know all the things to do, and still at times it's a struggle to do them. So I was a much bigger expert in some of these areas before I had kids and didn't have to implement them on my own. So just know that I know the struggle is real, and when you're reading with children, the process of learning to read is a very complex neurological process. It's a complex learning process, maybe the most difficult thing your child will ever learn once they're done learning to talk. And so we have to give ourselves a break in terms of really trying to make a lot of progress during this time with reading. We want kids to hold steady for sure. Absolutely, kids need to be reading every single day when they're at home, and they also need to be hearing stories. So the reading process is a lot broader than we always, I think, would have traditionally thought when we learned to read. And so just keep that in mind, that there are lots of activities that you can do at home that still fall within reading, and our understanding of literacy in a much more technological age is evolving. So although I know that that can be a challenge, and especially for struggling readers, we want them to hold court during this time for sure. And if you have any questions specifically about your child and their reading and things they should be doing at home, I really recommend you talk to their teacher first, as they will have been reading with them throughout the year and will have a much better understanding of things to be working on. When it comes to reading, sometimes more is not better, and so we want to spend that time really having quality reading time with our children when we have the time. So for us in our home reading has stayed as an evening activity, because that's the time where we can sit down next to them and really spend the time to do that reading. And I don't try to jam it in with some of the other tasks that they have to do during the day. So I just keep in mind that I know that it is a challenge for sure. Okay, so just keeping in mind, like when speaking about reading as a more broader process, meaningful, purposeful communication is the heart of learning to read and write. Students who learn that they can use reading and writing to investigate areas of interest, share their ideas, thoughts, and feelings, or interact with new people understand that the primary purpose of literacy is communication. And I'm going to kind of reiterate this many, many times, because reading can be a chore for many learners, and the reason that we do that is so that we can get to the point where we're able to understand things that we didn't know about. Reading and writing is about communication, and if you do writing, for example, in a way that nobody understands it, or then you're not sharing the ideas that you want to share. And for reading in the same way, the understanding piece is more important than your ability to decode words. Decoding or sounding out, breaking up words is a part that's the gateway into being able to get to things that you're really interested in. So we don't want it to be a chore, because the goal is for communication and a deeper understanding. Okay, so just keeping in mind that reading and writing is a part of a broader language process that involves speaking and listening. So our ability to talk about books, to talk about pictures in books, language in books, talking is the first part of reading. So that is why many students who have early speech and language difficulties often then have difficulties with reading, and may or may not be identified as having a learning disability in that area, because it's the first part. I mean, we can also use our speaking ability to enhance reading and the process of reading when we're doing it with our kids. We always want to be talking about books. The process of reading starts before you ever open the book. So lots of times, even though students can be struggling readers, they can have good language skills, and we want to draw on that as well. There are different components to reading. So phonics is one part. Phonemic awareness is the sounds and words and understanding the sounds and words. The English language has a complex phonetic structure, so that time can sometimes trip some kids up. Sometimes words don't look how they sound. Fluency is how smooth you read things. We always want kids to know that reading should sound like talking, and that's why we reread books over and over, so it sounds more and more like you're talking or you're telling a story. When it's choppy, it doesn't get the same effect. And vocabulary, understanding what words mean, how other words are connected. But our overall goal is comprehension or understanding of what we've read. Overall, just keep in mind, reading equals thinking, and thinking and reading go hand in hand. And so we really want kids to understand that as you're reading, you're always thinking, because if you use it as just a process of like sound out the words, that doesn't always build into our thinking skills. So if you are thinking about the words as you come along them, sometimes you'll be able to read them, even if you may have not known that word in isolation because you're thinking about what happened before and the pictures in the book or other things that might be happening in the book that gets you understanding and that are able to figure out some words. For our early learners, so grade 1, kindergarten, if that's the time, but even before that, that you're working with your child on reading. I'm not sure how old your children are, but some of the things that we really want kids to understand and work on is rhyming. And you can point out rhyming in lots of children's books because they often have a rhyme to them. So just keeping in mind, lots of times when students have difficulty with reading, they often have trouble with things like rhyming or segmenting words, taking words apart. And those are the building blocks to reading. So if you do have a younger child, I would think about focusing on rhyming, changing the first letter in a word. What would that word be? And also clapping out the beats in words. Sounding out words letter by letter is not a very effective process because actually words are broken up into chunks, and clapping out beats in words is one way to get students or children more aware of those segments in words. So guessing games, I spy, using words. I'm wearing something that rhymes with boat, or I'm thinking of something that rhymes with line and there's a sign. Those are kinds of games that you can use in the car or when you're going for a walk. So I'm going on our walk today and I'll say, our goal today is to, notice 3 things that start with a B sound or have an E sound in them. So some of those things can be used in a more fun way. Using songs that play with sounds and words. Apples and Bananas is one. Any old Sharon, Lois, and Bram are songs that change up sounds and words. Connecting sounds to the world around them, breaking apart words. So compound words can be a way to get started. So cowboy, what's the word if we take away boy? Just so that kids become more aware that there's 2 parts to a word. And then getting creative with different types of crafts. If you are working with a younger child, doing scavenger hunts where there's letters all over the house, or decorating a letter A with things that start with A and looking for pictures and printing them off the internet, and just some other ways to think about sounds. Some kids are naturally inclined to buy into some of those activities and others are not. So sometimes we have to get more creative with how we approach those. So once students or children have some of those building blocks, what comes to now when you're actually reading text. So phonological awareness is part of that. Another part is just basic sight words. So if you look up the top 200 Dolce, D-O-L-C-H-E, those are the most frequently used words in the English language in reading text. So a lot of those words don't sound out well. The doesn't sound out well. A lot of the words there, the 3 different theirs, don't sound out well. And so I would really recommend, those are words that kids need to see over and over and over. And the best way to generally do that is to reread text where they see those words often. But other ways to do it is to, create a word wall in their bedroom, because in their classroom or some other place, if you have a learning place, an office that they are working in, I would create a word wall based on those words organized by letter. So pulling them out, going through them. Some traditionally we would go through some of those words using flashcards. That can be effective for some kids, but generally they don't really like it. But that is one way. I have a flashcard app on my phone, so when we would get those as spelling words, I would have them on my phone, and just for 2 minutes after breakfast, we'd flip through them, and if you get one wrong, then you see it again. So flashcards are one way that you can do that, but the best way is really to be able to see them in text over and over and over. The purpose of having the word wall is when you come to a word in text so while you're reading, that they don't get right, I would say, well, that's one of the word wall words, to remember it there, and because we want them to see it over and over and over and over. Those are words that really trip up readers if they're making mistakes on them, because they have to spend their energy on some of the more difficult words, and those words increase fluency. They're often words too that kids make mistakes on, but actually the text still makes sense. So then sometimes you let those go because it still makes sense. If you say this or you say there, often it would be the same. So I wouldn't correct a lot of them, but we just want them in a space where you see them over and over and over, and you can point them out. Okay, this is one of the word wall words. These are one of the words that we really need to know. So I have a little video about what to do when you come to a word that you don't know, but just to talk a bit about it, 2 kinds of errors. So mistakes that make sense and mistakes that do not make sense. So I know that this is hard, but we really want you to wait until the child gets to the end of the sentence and ask, does that make sense? The process of learning to read, kids need to struggle with words. And sometimes when we jump in too quickly, they don't go through that process. So I know that that can be frustrating for some kids and they can get upset quite quickly. But our goal is for children to recognize when they made an error and self-correct, because if they don't learn how to do that, if we correct them every time they make a mistake. So sometimes if my own children will make a mistake on a word and I just let it go, because often they make mistakes on words like first names. So those words tend to not sound out well, and it really doesn't matter what name they use. I probably point it out 1 or 2 times and then I won't, because, so for example, the word Audrey was in a book that we were reading, and my daughter has a friend whose name is Aubrey, which is really close, and because that word makes a connection for her, she just reads it the same way, and like that's one we just let go. But we really do want to get to the end of a sentence and ask a child, does that make sense? And then if they say no, then we can go back and reread it and see if we can find where the error is. So things that you can do when you come to a word that you don't know, like what would make sense in this sentence, go back to the beginning and read it again. Think about what's happening in the story right now. Skip over the word and keep reading the sentence. Now try it again. Look at the first letter, let's say the first sound. So sometimes what kids need is just to kind of get their mouth ready for the word, and it will come because based on what's been happening previously. So we've seen that word before. Let's see if we can find it on another page. Let's cover up part of the word and sound out the part we see. Does that sound right to you? Because sometimes kids will say words that are sort of the word, but they're not actually how we would say that word in the English language. And like you read blank, is that how we usually say that word? So these are some things that you can say when a child comes to a word that they don't know, but we have to be really careful to wait until we get to the end of the sentence to let some errors go, especially if they don't affect the meaning of the text, because the most important part is that we understand what the reading is about. A recommendation, if you know that there will be some tricky words in a text, pull out the words and read those words to your child before you start reading. So when I said reading is a thinking process, we have to keep in mind that we want to be looking at the cover of the book. We want to start thinking. We're going to pull out some words. These are some words I noticed that are in this book that might be difficult, and let's just talk about what these words are. One of the reasons that series of books are really enticing to kids is partly because it has an ongoing story, but also because they have the same characters' names, and the characters tend to say the same kind of thing. So they get little phrases that they say, and they say them continually. And so once you've read the first one or two, they kind of get the idea. And so those that's one reason that series of books are really enticing to kids, because some of the things they might be reading at a slightly higher level than they would have if they read it the first time. It's almost like rereading. So remember, the purpose is comprehension, and sometimes you can give multiple prompts and then you just give the word and move on, just because it can interrupt the flow of reading, and especially remembering what's happening, which is the most important part. So I talked a little bit about rereading, but research is very clear that rereading helps children, helps to develop greater fluency. And we might be getting to a point in time where kids have read the books that are in your house. So don't feel bad if it just, for your home reading time, you just pull out a book that they've seen many times before. And it really just helps in terms of seeing those same words over and over and over. So don't feel bad about rereading. It actually is very beneficial. This is a little bit hard to see, but when my children were in grade 1, the grade 1 teacher sent home these, and you can actually get this for free if you just search bookmarks, reading strategy bookmarks. And we would just put this in the book, and then it would remind us of strategies to use for, like look at the picture, use the beginning letter, get your mouth ready, slowly stretch out each letter sound, chunk up the words, try to reread the sentence, skip the word. So flip the vowel sounds, because sometimes they will start with a long O and it's actually an ah sound. So sometimes if they can flip the vowels, then that will help them. But this would just be a cue of some of the strategies that we're going to use. And mostly it would be a reminder to me when I was getting frustrated with reading about different strategies that we could use that weren't always sounded out. That can be a good strategy, but often we sound out words. We sound them out letter by letter, and it's just not that effective with the English language. We need to usually break up words. So this is an example. I'm just going to show this. This is a teacher reading and some examples of some of the same strategies that we just talked about.
Hi, this is Jennifer Gonzalez for Cult of Pedagogy. If you have a child between kindergarten and grade 2, it's likely that that child's teacher has assigned about 10, 20, or 30 minutes of reading per night for homework. In this video, we're going to talk about what parents and other caregivers can do to make sure this homework really helps your child become a better reader. The first thing you should do is sit side by side with your child while they read. Although it's really tempting to try to get other work done, the point of this homework is to have an adult following along. When you sit side by side, you can watch the words as she reads them. This allows you to give her immediate feedback when she needs it. Number 2 is don't tell the words. To learn how to decode words on her own, a child needs lots of time to wrestle with them. If you jump in to tell her what the words are, she'll miss the learning that comes from that struggle. Sometimes all you have to do is wait quietly, giving her time to figure a word out.
The snake charmer.
Good, yeah.
Sits in the front of a basket and begins to play a flute.
Number 3, move beyond sound it out. Just trying to sound out a word letter by letter is not the most effective way to figure out what the word is. There are tons of strategies for decoding a word. One way is to think about similar words. If she's trying to read the word rake, point out that it has a lot of the same letters as the word cake, a word she already knows. That can help her guess the right pronunciation for rake. Chunking is another strategy, breaking the word into bigger chunks rather than trying to sound out each individual letter. Finally, allow your child to use the pictures in the book to make a guess. Never cover up the pictures when your child is reading. They're important tools to help her figure out words independently. You can also try covering up part of a word to see if your child can read the other part first.
Is the cobra really dancing to the music? No, it can't even hear it. Snakes have no. Oh, I didn't know.
You step on that word? You take off the end of it.
Out.
That's out, and then
Outer.
outer. Okay.
Ears.
Number 4, have your child reread some passages for fluency. If your child is merely sounding out individual words, she won't really get the meaning of a sentence. For the words to make sense together, they need to be read smoothly. So if your child takes a while to get through a particular sentence, have her go back and reread it so it makes more sense.
A long time ago, sailors thought these meant that someone was going to die.
Good. Now we kind of slowed down right there, so let's try to smooth this sentence out. A long time ago, sailors
thought this meant that someone was going to die.
Much nicer that time. Just be careful not to overdo it. Asking your child to repeat dozens of sentences in one session will drive her crazy. A few times is enough. And if she's struggling through most of every page, it's probably not the right book for her. Choose an easier one or tell the teacher that she's struggling at this level. Number 5, allow some mistakes to go uncorrected. It's not necessary to correct every single error your child makes.
His headdress
It's actually 2 words stitched together.
had the golden cobra on it.
Because the child is working hard to get the word headdress right, and then puts a lot of concentration into golden cobra, pointing out that she said the when she should have said would be too much of a distraction. Once she gets the more difficult words down, you can be more picky about making sure she reads all the words right. Number 6, allow your child to read the same book multiple times. If she reads a book on Monday and wants to read the same one again on Tuesday, that's okay. With each successive read, she'll get better and better at building her fluency. And by the end of the week, she should easily recognize words she struggled with at the beginning. Finally, you should keep reading to your child. Just because your child is learning how to read on her own, it doesn't mean she can't still learn a lot from listening to you read. By continuing to read to her for pleasure, you model correct pacing, reading with expression, and a love of books that will help make her a lifelong reader. Hey, I'm glad you're still here. If you're a parent or a teacher, take a look at one of our other videos, Distract the Distractor. It will show you a really simple way to get off-task kids quickly back.
Ha. All right, so that was just a bit of a review of some things that we talked about, but it kind of highlights the most important parts. This says handout, but I realize I can't really give a handout right now, but just to talk about what paired reading is. So paired reading is a strategy that you can use with some books that are slightly above your child's reading level or that they're really struggling with. And so what paired reading is you read at the same time as your child. So you start reading it together and they will kind of be dragged along with that reading process. So you read together and then at some point you set out a signal. So at first we want the child to give the signal, where then they give a tap or they do something that you figure out that they start reading a little bit on their own, and then they can tap you back in and then they read together. So that helps build fluency and it can help with beginning some books that might be difficult for your child. So you're reading at the exact same time, they give a cue, they maybe read a few sentences on their own, they cue you again, and you continue reading together. That's an important part of being sitting side by side with your child. I know that's not always possible, and hopefully during this time maybe it's more possible for some parents, but you know, for me sometimes we would read in the car on the way to and from school. Sometimes just having that time apart where I actually found it quite effective, because I actually found sometimes my children did better when I really couldn't correct them right away. When I'm listening to it, I could say things like, well, actually that didn't make sense, without kind of nitpicking about every word. And so that sometimes would be helpful too. No matter what level your child is, and the importance of reading aloud to children, read the same book as your child and discuss it if they're at that level. But for example, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, that's a challenging read for me to read, and I have a PhD in terms of sounding out some of those words, and some of them I still get them wrong. So I'm sure once I watched the movie and I was like, oh, that's how you're supposed to say that person's name. But having time to just read together and enjoy books. And now, right, Audible is free for kids. They have a story section. When we're in the car, we will often listen to a book. The people reading those books have very enticing voices. And the point is, we want that books to be open to kids, that they have that enjoyment of really good literature. And when you're a struggling reader, you're often not reading good literature. You're reading things that are not even that you're really interested in, because they're about going to the park, or something else that's not that interesting to you. So the importance of listening to books, talking about books, that's an important part of the reading process as well. Things to ask about comprehension: what's the story about? Who are the important people in the story? Where does it take place? Why do you think that person made that choice? What do you think will happen next? Would you recommend this book to your friends? So as children are reading short chapter books even, or at the end, what do you think is going to happen next? Asking questions about books, talking about books is a really important part of the process as well. So just keeping in mind that the reading is not just when you're decoding words, but also what happens before and what happens after. So considering the use of audio books, just because they can be used to introduce students to books above their reading level, sometimes books that their friends might be reading, but they can't access in terms of the reading level. Introducing new genres, new vocabulary. So all of those are important parts. There is something really beautiful about hearing stories beautifully told by talented storytellers, and audiobooks have those people. And it's a way to really get interested, see what's going to happen next, those parts that we really enjoy about stories. I talked about high frequency words, but these are other ways. I talked about word wall words, but you can also create bingo, scavenger hunt, searching for words in text. So we can do something like, okay, we're going to look for all the times that the is in this book, and however you want to mark that. We have these pens that we got from a book fair, where it's a secret pen, so when you use it, you actually can't see the line, but when you turn on the ultraviolet light, you can see it. So we have written in some of our books that no one can actually see. These are kinds of games too. Rolling books, so rolling games. So if you're having family game time where you roll a number, and then you choose one word that you're going to read, and then once you read it, you cross that one out. So those are some more interesting ways to look at high frequency words, because those are words that kids need to be able to just recognize automatically, or else it really trips up reading. So vocabulary is also an important part. So talking about what words mean. Sometimes we assume that kids know what words mean when they actually don't. Often kids think that the word obey actually means disobey. So I would really point out words, talk about them. And what they mean in books and compare them to other words, because the more a child's vocabulary is built up, the more it will help them with reading. Keeping in mind, reading and writing are reciprocal processes. If a child has trouble with reading, they often have trouble with writing too, although we often have very willing writers that will write and write stories and nobody can understand them, but we want to encourage writing as much as possible because they are so interconnected. If a child is writing for fun, I don't correct spelling, but if they were writing something for school and they made a mistake on one of the word wall words, I certainly would go back to point that out. But reading and writing are often working together. And this is the time, if you have time that you're working with your child at home, sometimes if kids are interested in books, they have some very great ideas about writing, but it takes them so long to get it down that we never really access that in school. Technology is helping for sure, but that's one thing that we can help with to really encourage them to get those great ideas down, and that you'll help them with that because it really shows what kind of a writer they could be. When we're comprehending material, there's usually important things to do. Summarizing is very important. We want kids to summarize material that they've read, make predictions, draw connections. We are much better at remembering things if we can draw connections to things we already know about or things we're interested in. So if kids are really interested in basketball, they can take a book about basketball and know most of the words that are going to be in there because they just know those words through language. So that's why you know, finding interest area books can be really important, and also to really visualize. When books don't have pictures, visualization can be an important part to accessing material. I'm not sure if we have any participants here that have secondary students, children, but when we are setting, an important part of their reading is really around the things that we talked about for younger kids, but it's just in a different way. So setting a purpose for reading, that's talking about it before, using your background knowledge, especially with textbooks. Textbooks have a certain text structure, so they have a heading, then they have little headings, and sometimes students don't really notice that that's there, and it actually can organize their thinking and their reading. So those are just some how that looks for secondary students. If you have a struggling reader now, technology can help with reading some of that material to them, even at the beginning, and because we can access textbooks electronically. And these are just a couple resources. This one is called Teaching Your Child to Read in 100 Easy Lessons. This book is probably not how I would teach reading. However, it has very scripted lessons for parents. And if you've never taught reading and it was never your plan to be a teacher and you don't really know where to start, this is a good resource because it tells you exactly what to say and exactly what to do. And, you know, being a good reading teacher takes years of being a teacher and also education. So this is one resource that can really help if you want to really have a step-by-step way to approaching reading. There are some other resources. Raz Kids, most kids would have access to that right now. Fast Forward at Home is a reading program that you buy. Lots of schools use Fast Forward. It's a short reading program that you do at home. Tar Heel Reader is generally for readers that are at a very beginning level of reading, and they are older. So lots of those books are about Fortnite. Lots of the material on there is developed by kids. So it can be very basic material, but it can be on topics that kids are interested in. Often use that resource when teaching kids with significant disabilities or complex disabilities to read, because it accesses them to things that their peers are interested in. If I was at the libraries were open, I would recommend books called high interest, low vocabulary books, because they have topics that are more interesting to kids, especially in Division 2, but have a lower reading level. And Epic Readers is just a website with many different books that you can access during this time. So if you're running out of books, that's an area that you can use. And, you know, celebrate successes. We are making successes. If we're reading every day or almost every day, I would call that a success. So just to keep in mind and to celebrate some of those times. Lots of our kids are struggling in other ways, and so keeping reading as an important part of your day, I think, is essential and has to come before some other things. But I also understand that it's a difficult time, and we have to celebrate the successes for ourselves and our children, and sometimes go easy on that. So that's 45 minutes. So are there any questions, Nicole?
If you want to stop screen sharing, and then
Sure.
we can pull up the, yeah, just take a moment to put in the chat. Let us know how you're doing with reading at home. Any questions that you have, now's your chance to ask the expert here. We have one question here. What is the flashcard app that you mentioned? That was right at the beginning of the presentation. Yeah. And while you're looking that up, I'll let people know that we will post your slide deck and as well as the recording on Rhonda's bio page, as well as on the blog page in the next couple of days too. So you can look up all of those resources again.
So the one I used was, it's called Chegg, C-H-E-G-G. And the reason I use that one is because you make your own flashcards. So what I would do is do whatever the spelling words were for my child for that week. So I'm not sure if kids are still, you know, it's going to depend on your teacher. But the reason I use that one is because I could make my own words. And then if there was a time that we were waiting for something, or sometimes they were just a little bit more motivated in terms of spelling. So, you know, their goal was they look at the word. So see it, say it, write it is often a good spelling strategy. So I would use the flashcard. They look at the flashcard. They would spell out the word, they turn it over, and then they would write it. And it's really just the same thing as me writing it on a piece of paper, but they think it's more interesting. So, you know, we go with that sometimes.
Yeah, just having lots of ways to mix it up, I find is helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, it's sometimes just such a balance between routine, because we do the same reading at the same time, and my kids respond to that just because they know that that's the time. And so if we move it around, then they will say, well, this is like, feel like that it's negotiable. And so I keep it part of a routine and part some novelty.
Good. We have another question. Reading is a real power struggle at home with my grade 3. Oh yeah, I can resonate with that. I know he needs to read all the time, but I do not always want him to read on his own, as I know that he is not really concentrating and likely not comprehending much. What do you recommend as far as how often he reads with parents versus reading on his own?
I would encourage a child to read on their own as much as they want to, right? If that's the way that they're accessing, and I would say 20 minutes a day with a parent. And with a parent, you know, once you're in grade 3, I'm not sure where your child's reading level is, but once you're in grade 3, you're almost evolving into silent reading. And that actually is a developmental process they should go through. So once you're silent reading, it's harder to read with them sometimes. So if they're at a level of which you guys are reading the same book even, sometimes just shared reading time is that we're all going to sit on the couch and like, this is a reading time. And I know sometimes it's hard that that's the time you want to do, you know, can catch up on some of the things, but sometimes I would just read the same chapter and then talk about it. At grade 3 is still a time where reading aloud is appropriate. Once you're going to grade 4, they're not reading aloud very often, and lots of times kids hate it when teachers make them read aloud. So you know, 20 minutes a day I would say with a parent, and if they wanted to read individually, as much as they want. You know, if you have a sense that they're not understanding very much of it, it's okay. It's okay. They're getting something out of it. And even if they're just picking up little pieces, graphic novels are a great way for grade 3 and 4 kids to access text, because they still can understand the story without reading very few words. So, you know, I would set a time of 20 minutes of where we're reading together, and maybe the expectation is at least 20 minutes some other time. Yeah, I have a friend who is a reading specialist who actually asked her child's teacher to send them a message saying they had to read 30 minutes a day because they will listen to the teacher more than her. So, you know, it's a struggle for everyone.
We'll just give people a couple more minutes to see if you have any other questions you'd like to type for Rhonda. I mentioned too while we were setting up the webinar, Rhonda, that some of my kids are in French immersion, and some of the special challenges related to that. One thing I've always been curious of, and I was thinking about it again in your presentation, is do they believe that like the reading fundamentals in one language transfer over a lot of them to another language? So reading in English is also helping them learn how to read in French. I might be just looking for a way to justify doing more reading in English than French, but I'm curious, you know, how many of the fundamentals, you know, are not language specific, you know?
Yeah, you know, there are some there's lots of sounds and more grammatical things that don't carry over, like especially in French, in terms of the ordering of words. A lot of the sounds are similar, French, Spanish, you know, kids move back and forth between French and Spanish quite easily. The reason sometimes reading in English is better, they're stronger, is because they have stronger English language skills. So of course some of the fundamentals cross over, and once you understand story and how books are set up, then it lets reading be easier. But the breaking down of words and seeing words repeatedly, you have to do that in the other language to get stronger at it.
Yeah. Good. I don't see any other questions right now. I'll just let people know that Rhonda does do specialized reading assessments with children as well. I know from my own experience with my kids, sometimes it's hard as a parent to pinpoint what the challenges are and exactly where your kids are at. So if you'd like to contact us about that, you're welcome to. And also if questions just come to you after the webinar, I'm sure that Rhonda would be happy to answer them. You can just send them to the clinic email, info@riversedge.com, and we will definitely forward them on to Rhonda. And otherwise, I just really want to thank you for taking some time out of your evening to be here with us. I want to just welcome you to any of the other webinars. You're always welcome to join us. Tomorrow, we have our weekly mindfulness meditation with Grant Wardlow, which we've really been enjoying. And there's about 5 spots open for anyone who's interested in that. We might just need a way to calm ourselves after spending the morning teaching reading to our kids. Anyway, thank you again, and thank you very much to you, Rhonda, for that presentation, and we'll make sure that we have it up on the website shortly so people can access the resources.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for joining me.
Take care.
Bye-bye.